Hey everyone, Yan Zhao back again. I told you it would not be a year this time. Today we are back with the king of indie comics, Peter Simeti, the king of cryptids, the master of the Alterna Comics.
Man, oh man, that's quite the intro.
Of course, man, of course. For
It's
you,
your words, not mine.
that's right. You can use some full quotes there.
All right.
So it's been quite a while since you've been on last, and it seems like everything in Alterna world is going pretty well these days.
I guess you could say that. It's going just about as well as it's gonna go. Yeah, I mean it's to me it's hard for me to leverage and gain knowledge of whether or not it's good or bad based on things that are occurring because everything is so relative. So it's as long as every day I'm like as long as we're here and doing what we're doing, yeah, it's doing pretty good.
All right. Keeping the doors open.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So, I was watching last night. You had a wonderful stream about the characters of King Cryptid. You managed to cram an hour's worth of content into 2 hours and 38 minutes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
uh, so,
I
one
didn't think that there were going to be as many people asking as many questions. I thought everyone was just going to be kind of sitting back and being like, "All right." But it was really cool to see so many people really theorizing, and then that took me down several different tangents. So yeah, we really ballooned that.
So one thing that struck me out was actually very early on in the stream. You had mentioned that you're never going to do, or probably won't be doing, any trade paperback.
Well, no, not never. It's going to be 10 years. 10 years. Yeah, 10 years of King Cryptid, and then we'll put out a trade, and the trade's going to be based on the favorite issues voted on by the readers. So we'll have like close to 50 or maybe more than 50 issues at that point of King Cryptid. That's enough. That's a good pool to collect from. Um, uh, and then the readers are going to be like, I like, issue 17. I liked issue 26. I liked issue number one, that kind of a thing. And I'll see what is coming in based on that feedback. How I'm going to attain that at that point in time, we'll see. I mean, there's newsletters and emails and whatever kind of social media around at that point. And the reason I want to wait for 10 years, especially, is because I feel like uh, so many books nowadays are built for the trade. And it's like story arc after story arc, 4 issues, 6 issues, whatever it is, and then it goes right to trade. I think that's a really big problem in comics. And this is coming from a publisher that primarily put out graphic novels and quote unquote trades, even though they weren't compiling any single issues really. We did that for about 10 to 11 years. And everyone thought that was nuts. And then all of a sudden, everyone started really doing it and putting out trades for every damn thing. It wasn't just about whether or not the storyline was popular or really important. It was more just about, yeah, let's crank out this other form of getting stuff to the customer or whatever to a different market. And instead of going back to print on issues and things like that, going right to trade. So I don't want to train the readers to anticipate trades. I don't want to also let them know that there are story arcs in King Cryptid where I could easily compile 4 or 5 issues together and put out a trade every so often because King Cryptid's an episodic series. So every single episode, every single issue is a new story, and it's a complete story. Do they connect? Yeah. There's an overall continuity. Are there certain stories that connect closer together than others? Absolutely. But the thing is that they're told like widespread apart. So maybe it's issue 4, maybe it's issue 9, maybe it's issue 15 or 16. So we'll revisit certain things at certain points in time. But you always get a complete story. It just benefits you further if you read the previous thing. And we'll have an editor's note in there when we mention past issues and stuff like that so someone can reference it if they missed out and they want to catch up and learn more specifically on the events that happen. Otherwise, you start having constant issues where you're going that time when that thing happened, and then that thing, and then I did that thing, and then that occurred, and then you're wasting pages of catching up readers. That just doesn't matter. You could just mention the event, that thing that had occurred at, blah blah blah, and then asterisk see issue 3 or whatever that is, referencing something that, remember this thing and we got that. And so you just have characters talking organically among each other and naturally, and then you can just reference the reader on the side. And that's what comics did for the longest time. It's not like this is anything new. But I don't want to start putting out all these trades and then everyone misses out on the single issues, because that's where it's at. This is a single issue series first and foremost.
Well, one thing I was wondering is, back in the day, obviously the big comics companies, they started putting out trade paperbacks because they don't have to pay creatives again, so it was super cheap. But the second reason was that it was hard for people to get the back issues and find the stories. And you had like Marvel with the X-Men, they released the classic X-Men title when X-Men was at its high, so that people could catch up and they could sort of understand what these backings were. Are you going to always have the floppies of King Cryptid in print? And if you do, how does that jive with collectors? Will they be different in some way? Like, will they be labeled second print or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, kind of at Alterna, we've done that before where the Alterna logo changes color, but, I might do something for the second printing. The thing is, with these first printings, I'm printing an excess amount so I could have at least enough for 3 to 5 years. So because I'm doing campaign after campaign, so I've got a ton of issues 1 to 4 that are all ready to go for the next year, the year after, etc. Because we're going to do a campaign every year for 4 to 5 issues. So this way, there's never going to be, at least for a while, there's never going to be a lapse where people can't get those first 4 issues directly from us. And then eventually, we're gonna print 5 to 9 on this campaign. So then next year I'll have 1 to 9 ready to go for people who want 10 to 13, and so on and so forth. So once we hit that point where we're sold out of back issues, I'll kind of assess demand at that point too. I don't want to go back to print just because we sold out. There has to be demand for it, because I got to print at least 500 copies. So if I see that there's still demand and it's snowballing and we're growing and more people are going, hey, I'd really like to get issues 1 to 4 or whatever it may be, then I'll go, yeah, maybe we'll go back to print. But like I said, it's an episodic series. So you don't necessarily need to read issues 1 to 4. Like, I read X-Men, I don't know, I think I started at like 226, something like that. I didn't need 1 to 225 to understand what was going on. It's that kind of a thing. And this is very much a series that's like that, like the way comics kind of used to be, where you just didn't really have to read the hundreds of issues. But, if you want to seek them out, go for it. And that'd be kind of funny if, 10 to 15 years or whatever, I do like a classic King Cryptid sort of series, and we reprint a couple of those pivotal first type of issues. But, stuff like that, it's just, that's the beauty of going indie, and especially when you own what you own. You don't need to necessarily just be at the mercy of the publisher. So if there's demand for the issue, and the same thing goes for the other Alterna titles too. If there's demand for those issues and they sell out, we'll go back to print. But if there's only like 1 or 2 people that are really asking about it, it's not really worth it to go back to print. It's better to say, good luck on eBay, or put the feelers out on social media, or come into one of the Alterna chats or something and be like, does anyone have this and they want to trade or sell? That kind of a thing. So I don't want to have that knee-jerk reaction of, oh no, we sold out, back to print. Let it lie a bit, and then we'll see how it goes with the readers.
Right. So we did have one question from the Dungeon Delver. Peter, are you yourself a true believer of cryptids?
Oh yeah. Now, not all of them, of course. And the same thing goes for all things paranormal. I believe that these things absolutely exist. But it's not that I believe every single thing that's told about these things. That like if someone just is like, I saw Bigfoot, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, you absolutely did. I want to have the story. I want to know if you got any, did you get any proof whatsoever? But conceptually in these things, yeah, I'm totally a believer. 100%. And the thing is it's kind of been proven throughout history too. There's been several different species of animal, and more than that if I really look it up, that they were spoken of in legend, or no one really knew about them and didn't have like physical evidence. It was just basically the way a cryptid is, where you know about it through story. And eventually they found these animals. So one of them is like the Highland gorilla. That was just a myth for a while. Even back in the day, there were myths of pandas existing. That wasn't really a thing. So there's all kinds of different creatures. In terms of the ones that we know about, like I said, like with the cryptids, like Bigfoot or Jersey Devil or Chupacabra or anything, you could go and list a million things, Loch Ness, whatever. It's one of those things where, yeah, I'd love it if they existed, but at the same time, it's I'm not discounting that they could exist. It's just at this point in time, it's something where you look at it and go, some of the evidence is compelling, and then some of the evidence is fraudulent. So it really is, especially in this day and age where you could doctor a photo and a video now so easily. It's
Yeah.
really difficult to take that evidence now. Even the Patterson Gimlin film of Bigfoot is rather coincidental. These guys were going out there to basically make a mockumentary about finding a Sasquatch, and then lo and behold, there's a Sasquatch on film. So it's
Did they admit that that was fake?
no, neither of them have ever admitted it was fake.
Really?
One of them, well, I mean, both of them have stuck to their guns, saying that no, it was legitimate. But there's been people analyzing it all over the place, and saying, well, it's not a fake video in terms of it isn't like something that was doctored up, and that thing that's in the film wasn't in the film. But then it's also, if it's a costume, it's a great costume. And at the same time, it's one of those things where you look at it and go, all right, well, if they did coincidentally get that on film, there's a lot of circumstances involved for that to happen, and it's quite interesting. And it's always been weird to me that the only way that Bigfoot would look directly pretty much at that camera would be if there was people there, because otherwise the Bigfoot's not going to look directly at that camera and then keep walking. So it just wouldn't. It's like if you have a camera just set up, it's so unlikely that a deer, a dog, any other kind of wild animal just walking along is going to spot that camera and look at it directly and then keep walking. The odds are incredible. Now, if there's a person there behind the camera, that's different. You're going to find that they're kind of like, oh, there's something there, and then they're going to keep on scurrying along. So if you're there behind that camera, why are you letting that Bigfoot go? Why don't you follow it a little bit with the camera and try to see if you can capture where it's headed off to, or even shut the camera off and actually try to kind of keep your distance, but track it and follow it. So there's a lot of weird things with that film. But it's one of those things where there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, I think it's real. I think it's fake. I think, the jury's out still conclusively on what it is. But overall with cryptids, I absolutely believe that there are cryptids that exist.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember if people want to go back, I think it was about a year, you had a nice series of people who came on and talked about their cryptid experiences.
Yeah. There was a couple different things because in King Cryptid, we also mentioned real places, real operations and projects that have gone on that are now declassified. One of the real places in issue 4, that's specifically at Huckamuck Swamp in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. That's got a long history of the paranormal. Another one in issue 3, we've got Lincoln, New Hampshire, mentioning the Betty and Barney Hill abduction that occurred in '61. So there's a lot of different things that we touch upon within the series that if someone wants to look it up and do a deep dive and go down the rabbit hole, you're more than welcome. And that's what I think is part of the fun. I always love that kind of thing with comics. I remember being a kid and looking up adamantium in the dictionary, or in the encyclopedia.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this a real thing? And of course it isn't. It's a hell of a name, though. But you look at it and it makes the mind start wandering about like, well, what metals would be really close to adamantium, and then could they really graft that kind of stuff to the skeleton and yada yada, and you start looking up the pseudoscience behind it. And the best part about any science fiction is when they can ground at least some of it in proven science. So even if it is theoretical or pseudo, uh, some of it eventually occurs. We've seen that happen time and time again with a lot of science fiction, where there's things that occur within the story, the film, whatever it is, that are so conceptual, so far out there at the time being. But then we have either something that surpasses that right now or something that mimics it right now. And then the science, because it was based on true science, it could technically happen. They just didn't have the technology at that point in time. So that's always the crazy part. I mean, you go back, if you went back in time 200 years ago and you gave someone a cell phone, they'd think you were a damn witch. You know what I mean? Like they'd
Yeah.
be very suspicious. They would look at that and go, "That's magic." you know and the thing is, we wouldn't really even most of us anyway wouldn't know how to replicate it. We wouldn't know how to recreate a phone, especially with the materials around, but we would know how to use it and show someone how to use it. Hell, you could take a flashlight and show someone that from 200-300 years ago and they would think it was some kind of magic. So it's all about the technology involved with all of these things. So that's kind of the mindset going into the stories within King Cryptid, because we do have stories spanning the course of 500 years.
So in the King Cryptid series, will there be the paranormal, or that's off the table? It's just potentially plausible cryptids.
Oh no, yeah, we go into the paranormal as well. So I mean, even in issue 7, we've got a werewolf, and a werewolf can sort of be classified as a cryptid, but not really. So when you see a werewolf for the first time transformed, you might think it's a cryptid, not being aware that it's a human that is transformed. But there's curses, there's witches. We're eventually going to have ghosts. We're going to have all kinds of different things. We've got aliens in issue 8. So there's things that aren't just paranormal or cryptid based, but also touching upon things that could actually and most likely truly do exist, and incorporating them into our stories. So, but it's still going to be of a fantastic kind of nature.
So the Dungeon Delver asks, will you reference and graft onto things like the Patterson film, various factual close encounters?
Here and there, here and there. I wanna still have the world set up in a way where, although certain things that are factual are referenced, we're not going to necessarily base issues around that. So, and what I mean by that is, I'll go back to the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. I'm not going to have an issue in 61 where King Cryptid witnesses them getting abducted. I'm not going to have something like that. And it's mostly out of respect as well for the people involved in their families. Will I have something that possibly not parodies or satires, but something that kind of mirrors that in a way? Yeah, I'll probably have stuff like that throughout the series. But in terms of basing it on actual true events and things like that, that'll get referenced to in conversation or things like that, but it won't necessarily be turned into an issue.
So this is King Cryptid is really your first time back since the chair, isn't it?
For the most part, yeah. Other than that, I think it was like 2 or 3 short stories. But as far as a series goes, and the chair was a mini series, just a 4-issue mini series, and also turned into a graphic novel. Well, actually, reversed. It was a graphic novel first, and then turned into a mini series later. But this is my first ever ongoing series, and I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time, and I didn't think I was ever going to be able to. So that's a big reason why I'm so excited about it, because this is subject matter that has meant a lot to me for a really long time. I've loved everything and anything paranormal, unknown, unexplained, whatever, for longer than I've loved comics even. I've always had comics around, but I really got into paranormal stuff when I was a little kid and could actually start reading. And even the stuff on the TV or whatever, I would see it, it would freak the hell out of me, but I was still so interested. It's one of those, you cover your eyes, but you still open them up a little bit. I loved a lot of things horror and sci-fi as a kid. And I think it kind of spurned my love for comics too, really getting into that. And especially the kind of comics I really got into were centered around things that just seemed like a bit out there. It wasn't just someone with superpowers. It was interesting as to how they got their powers. It was science based or a mixture of fantasy and science, that kind of thing. I really loved a lot of sci-fi type based comics. Silver Surfer was one of my favorite characters as a kid because of that. So it was just a lot of stuff like that, and King Cryptids incorporating my love of all things that have kind of made me me, and putting that into this series. So I've got a ton of ideas, a ton of characters, a ton of stories to tell. So I mean, I'm here to tell them for as long as the readers want to read them, and I really mean that. I mean, I've got this series planned out for a very long time. So there isn't anything here. If you ever read anything in King Cryptid and you feel like, oh, I wonder if he meant to do that. Yes, yes, I did.
So now that you're sort of back in the saddle, was there any like transitional period where you sort of had to like kick off the rust and like get back into writing mode, or was it pretty easy getting back into writing a regular series?
It was shockingly easy, and I hate to say that because there's people out there that struggle so hard with writing and doing that and coming up with story ideas and characters and things like that. But I've said it before, and I've honestly I've been saying it since I introduced King Cryptid. The idea it didn't really. I didn't have to think too much about it, and I don't know if it's because it was just ruminating in there for years and years and years, just like sitting in the back of my mind. But it just I knew I wanted to write stories about monsters, about something that had to do with combining magic and science, and about the fantastical nature of everything in between. So the series was kind of always just lurking. The character was always just there. But I do live in New Hampshire. I moved up here about, well, we moved up in 2015, 2016, something like that. And it changed my life, to be perfectly honest. It's just a very different energy up here. I used to live in New York and just never liked it there, never fit in, never felt right. I hardly ever wanted to go to the city. We lived on Long Island, and it just I don't know. It didn't gel with me. But up in New Hampshire, it was just like it felt like home, and I had never been up until when we had moved. Really, my wife had been up there, and she had vacationed with her family a couple times. And was like, "You have to come up here. We have to." I've always wanted to live up here because she really loves it. And I was like, New Hampshire, okay, that's odd. I never really I knew I was going to leave New York, but I never really pictured New Hampshire. And so we went up, and it was just weird. It spoke to me, and I don't know if something up here spoke to me in more ways than one, but I got a lot of ideas as soon as I started coming up here, but I put them on the back burner because I figured I couldn't ever really get to them. And now I actually can get to them. So it feels like I've been sort of writing this series for a long time without actually sitting down to write it, and I think that's why it's coming so easy to me. And like I said before, my whole life I've been interested in the paranormal and all oddities and weird things and all stuff like that. So coming up with subject matter to expound upon and developing characters isn't really it's not as tricky as if I sat down and I was just going to write a straight up superhero book or any kind of book where I'm diving into it and I'm not as familiar with the territory, but I think it might sell. And that's the biggest thing with this book. I'm not creating it thinking that, oh yeah, this is really going to sell. People are really going to love this, and that's why I'm doing it. Now, of course, I want people to be entertained by it. I want this to resonate with them. If they're into this subject matter, great. If they're not, I think the stories will still resonate. But I'm not necessarily creating it solely with that in mind of what can I make that'll sell and will really be great for other people. Now, when I do create, I make sure that my standard of quality is there so that someone is going to get something out of it. They are going to get entertained. They are going to get a great story. But that's not the purpose of why I'm creating it. The purpose of why I'm creating it is because these are the stories I want to tell, and hopefully these are stories people would like to read. And it's a genuine place where I'm coming from telling these stories. It's not something, though, where I'm going to go, I don't care if you like that character. I don't want to write anymore about that character. So that's the other part where the storyteller of me comes in, where if there's a character that all of a sudden takes off and is very popular with people and they would like to see more of it, I go, all right, I'll come up with a couple more stories for that character and work that character in here and there. So and that kind of thing happens all the time with different series. I think it's such a misstep when creators are like, no, 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 no. I like the characters I like. They're supposed to be viewed this way. And these are the ones you're going to like. These are the ones you're not going to like. You never know what the audience is going to like or not like. So you have to be receptive to that. But as far as King Cryptid goes in that series, it centers around him and it's his world. But sometimes in certain issues, we're not going to see a whole hell of a lot of him. And sometimes we are. Sometimes there's going to be certain issues that focus on other characters and other events because that's important to set up something else. So it's a lot of that, but I think that's going to kind of make the series really interesting too. It's not just about, well, who's King Cryptid up against this issue? It's about what's going on in the world of King Cryptid, which is similar but very different.
So one thing I wonder too, since this is more of a labor of love, and most of the other Alterna stuff that you publish are their creator-owned properties. So I believe you only have the U.S. rights. Have you considered maybe at some point in the future having King Cryptid translated and trying to get into markets where comic fandom, comic sales are larger overall? Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, France.
Yeah, that could always be a possibility. Yeah, yeah. We've had books before they go out there, and like you said, because it's creator owned, I mostly focus on the U.S. rights. So there's several other titles that have been adapted in different countries. But yeah, especially because cryptids aren't an American thing whatsoever; they're a worldwide thing, and that's what's kind of so fascinating about them, I think, too, because you'll find many different cultures have very similar cryptid stories. And you're like, well, how did that happen? That's kind of interesting, which lends a little more credence to making them sort of believable and realistic in that sense. But yeah, I'm definitely down with that. If that happens, that's great. I think that would be wonderful to get the story out there to more people. And I think it is subject matter that potentially could be very interesting to all kinds of different people across the world.
Yeah, I think so. Really, monsters. We've been telling stories about monsters or secret monsters that your cousin's friend who maybe was drunk one night saw out in the woods. Like everybody in the world has those kind of stories, and they've been going back to since we were on the plains, sitting around campfires, hoping not to get eaten by giant cats.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. A lot of these stories were kind of words of warning. A lot of them were also ways to kind of pass on various, not just legends, but also different things that may have happened to different people that they couldn't really properly explain. So we have a lot of that within the realm of cryptids and paranormal history, but at the same time, there's just so much of it, and so many stories that are similar across the board that it really is just kind of it's kind of suspect, especially when there's stories about and I've brought this up before on other shows, but stories about like thunderbirds and things like that, stuff that they see in the sky. And then you'll even just stories about dragons across the entire world. It's very interesting. It's very interesting because it's just these are people that shouldn't have been able to communicate with each other. So they shouldn't have been able to tell each other about these stories. They shouldn't have been able to exist. So either, there's one of many different ways that could be a possibility. But the fact is that these are shared experiences that are occurring without people actually sharing these experiences among each other, at least not directly. So that's what makes me go, we don't really know a whole hell of a lot about anything. In modern time, we like to think we know everything there is to know. And that's going to be our undoing if we really want to have that attitude. Because if you think about it, right, if we always had the attitude as a people, and we kind of have, and it's a stubborn process for humanity to kind of move past, but we've always kind of had this weird attitude of we know all we know, and that's what we know. There is nothing else. Everything we know today is everything we could possibly know. until tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes along, and everything we know today is everything we could until the day after that, and so on and so forth. So we have to admit that all we really know is that we don't know a whole hell of a lot. We're trying and we're constantly discovering, and the whole point of science, that I believe is the point of science, is always the search for the truth. And the truth is kind of elusive sometimes. Sometimes it's objective, but in some cases it's pretty elusive. And when it comes to history and events that we just weren't there for, we have to rely upon all kinds of different sources and interpret them in many different ways. So we're still not going to concisely know exactly what was what in any concrete fashion. It's just a really good guess. Everything's a really good guess and a theory and all these other things. But there's a lot of people that are like, oh, we know. This is proven and we know. Well, what about this, and this? Well, there's always outliers to science and stuff. They come up with crazier excuses than a true believer would come up with. Some of the skeptics I've heard out there for some of the things that they'll say, and there's no proof. It's just they'll say that, oh, it must have been this, and they dismiss it. It's crazier than the actual thing. Even going back to things like the pyramids and how they think those were built. There's so much. It's just guessing. It's just guessing. We don't know. We can't even recreate them, for crying out loud. It's not even like they've tried to put these things to the test. Here's a hypothesis, and we're going to replicate it. No one is able to replicate this with what we have right now, let alone putting ourselves back in the position of like, this is what they might have used and this is how they did it. So it's so strange in science to sit there and say that we know everything we could possibly know and that's all there is. Have it finite. Because if that was the way that we thought, we would never really know anything. It would always just be like, all I could possibly know today and forever is what I know right now. And that there's no need to know anything else. And if we did that for forever and ever and ever, we wouldn't know a damn thing. We wouldn't be talking right now. I wouldn't be writing books. We wouldn't learn how to read. We wouldn't know what anything is. So it's that constant thing that's innate within humanity, somewhat specifically as far as we know, I think. But who the hell knows other than that? I mean, animals could be out there being like, yeah, been there, done that. These silly humans, man, they think they know everything. And they could be talking among each other that are just like, just live life. Just live life and enjoy life. Eat, sleep, survive. There you go. Stop trying to fight and wrestle the world for dominance. Just coexist. Maybe that's the animal philosophy because for millions of years prior, they were doing what we were doing. Who the hell knows? There's a long period of time. I think modern human beings, as far as we know, it's something like 200,000 years old. There's a lot of time before that where a lot of other things existed before us. So, yeah, I have no idea. Everything is a good guess. That's it. So as a storyteller, all of that is my playground because I get to take some good guesses too.
So, in the King Cryptid series in general, a lot of these old stories that we were talking about, they had sort of like moral tales or cautionary tales and whatnot. Do you see any of King Cryptid like that, or is it just pure fun?
Oh yeah. I mean, I try to have every issue has a theme to it. There's a thematic, philosophical theme, but it's not a preachy finger wagging theme. It's more like this is what's occurring within these characters, and this is what they're going through. And if you get something out of that, great. If not, then that's fine too. So you can enjoy it either way. But if kids were to read King Cryptid, and I do think the series is appropriate for kids. It's not a series with strong language. There's not a ridiculous amount of violence. There's no nudity. It's just good old-fashioned fun storytelling with layers of intensity throughout the story regarding the themes and the relationships that come across. But yeah, I always try to build in something like that because otherwise I feel like if you don't have something thematic within the story, there's really no point to the story. So you don't have to have necessarily a lesson that feels like a PSA, where like back in the day, like G.I. Joe or He-Man, and they would come out at the end of the episode and talk to you about kind of the moral of the story and drill it home, And that was great for different reasons, because it really kind of was like, hey, this is specifically for kids, and we're going to make sure that we're telling something that's not going to rot their brain and hopefully make them into, nice adults. But King Cryptid's not. We're not going to have King Cryptid come out and be like, "Okay, boys and girls, the lesson of the story today was," it's going to be more or less the fact that characters do certain things. There's things that happen to them. They react in certain ways, and the reader will see how that unfolds. And you get to determine whether or not it's right, it's wrong, what side you're on. I know there's going to be people that root for Victor Lugo. He's a cryptid bounty hunter, and he's one of those characters that he plays by his own rules, and he does whatever it takes to get the job done. People love that character, and he could be the bad guy, but that character speaks to the inner mentality that people would love to have, to be able to do that. In day-to-day life, you just don't give an F, and you just play by your own rules, and what you see is, you want it, you take it. It speaks to a lot of people out there. It's like a power fantasy for them. But even though that character, and they still might very well know that this character is the bad character, it's the villain, they're still drawn to that character. And there's tons of characters in comics that I love that are like that. These villains that you love to hate kind of thing. When they're in an issue, you're like, this is going to be a good one, that kind of a thing, because it's going to be a good story, because that character is compelling. But it's the kind of thing, too, where there's certain characters where I think people are going to really, it's going to tug at their heartstrings for those characters and what they go through. It's a bit of a tragic element to a lot of them, because there's an element in King Cryptid where a lot of things are occurring to human beings, where they're being experimented on, and they're being turned into these creatures, and they're being altered, and they've been tricked and manipulated to undergo these experimental treatments. And it's the kind of thing of just kind of seeing this really bad stuff happen to people that don't deserve it, and they're trying to deal with the cards they've been dealt. And sometimes they do good things, sometimes they do bad things, but either way, it's one of those things where we see the character and how they react to it. It's never about telling the reader how to feel about it. It's more about telling the reader, here's the story, here's the character, here's what's happening, and, you decide how you feel about it.
So how has it been working with the artists? Because for King Cryptid, you've got like a revolving set of artists. I know you mentioned one time that I think you had what artist is going to do what issue planned out into the mid-20s. How is it sort of letting your baby go for them to do the visuals, especially considering comics is a primarily visual medium?
I think it's great. For me, it's so awesome. I love seeing it come back, and it's like a gift. They do, the artists on board, and so far it's been Christian Rossi, Nick Hunter, Alex Jovich, Kier Covington, Frankie B. Washington, and I believe that's it for right now, because they're kind of doing all 9 issues, but they have different parts to play, and there's no artist that does an issue 2 times in a row. So I want it always kind of feeling a bit different as you read issue to issue. So even if you come back to it, or you have a favorite artist or whatever it may be, and you see their work again, it's like seeing an old friend. So it's that kind of a thing, and it keeps it interesting, keeps it it keeps the readers on their toes too. But the artists, I pick them based on their skill sets and their strengths. So if there's an artist that's really good with certain kinds of characters or certain kinds of stories thematically, if there's an artist that's better drawing a sci-fi story or a horror story or something that's more akin to a superhero type story, those artists will draw those stories. I want to play the artist up to what they're best at, because otherwise the art and the story is going to suffer. If I'm having an artist that should do a horror book and instead they're doing a more dramatic, emotionally intense book, and they are really good with suspense and angle and all the different things that you would utilize in a horror story, it's going to kind of be weird. You're going to get a weird tone that's going to come across that's not going to really fit the story. So what I do with these, I kind of I draft them as best as I can in terms of getting the right artist for the right story, and then I give them the script, and the script is basically just scene by scene breakdowns. I don't want them trying to figure out how to use my words or my dialogue or whatever it is and build the art around that. I don't want them all of a sudden shifting characters around within the panel or whatever, because they're going to have to set it up so that someone's on this side and they're talking and they're doing, because then it starts feeling like more like or less that you're reading a comic book, but in the worst way, because it's going to feel unnatural. Everything about it is going to feel like it is at surface just to the words, the dialogue. But comics being a visual medium, to me, it's kind of like 55-45. So 55 towards the art, 45 towards the writing. And if you're doing a good job as a writer, you know when to kind of pump the brakes and you know when to hit the gas. And if you got a certain scene where the art is really doing some heavy lifting, or it's some nice stuff where it's a poignant moment and you want to let the story breathe a bit and you don't want to crowd it up with anything, as a writer, you should be able to know how to edit that and adjust. But if you go in there with your script and you want to stick to the script, and the script is what it is, and these characters say what they say, and my script is king and your art is secondary, what's going to happen is that story is going to look pretty awkward. And you're going to find that you're going to be cutting off the creativity of a lot of the artists that could go in there and do a far better job making that page sing, as opposed to you telling them what to do based on your writing. So I'll go in there and I'll kind of retro script, because I got the script in my mind, basically. And I know that's a lot of crazy gobbledygook for a lot of writers to hear. They go like, you got to have your index cards and your whiteboard and your whole, And I'm like, that's in my mind, man. So what happens is I tell them the whole scene of the story and I set it up. Literally like we're doing the campfire story, So the dark and stormy night kind of a thing. It's all about how the story is. And then they visualize that and interpret it. And I let them know sometimes if a certain page is a splash page or a certain image has to focus on a certain character because they're going to have a reaction to what's occurring or they're going to be saying something important. Other than that, the artist does whatever they got to do. And then they send me thumbnails. It's a breakdown process after that, and we approve of whatever. And then thumbnails, pencils, inks, colors, every step of the way we approve of whatever. This way that we can catch anything that needs to be tweaked. And on the first 4 issues, I don't think we changed more than 4 pages on the first 4 issues between all the issues. So the artists really loved the creative freedom. They enjoyed it. And it was a great working experience with them because of that. Because every single time they were given a page, it was essentially like, hey, go have fun. Have fun. You know what you're doing. Go and draw this. Now, the thing is that I can't go and hire, though, an artist who doesn't really have a whole hell of a lot of experience. That's the other downside. I got to hire someone who's very confident in what they're doing. And if they're not entirely confident with what they're doing and they're not really comfortable with that style yet, they have to be comfortable with revision and being used to being creative. And in comics, a lot of the times I find that there's a lot of artists that are so used to that with the scripts, because writers, I don't know if you've heard, but writers can have egos.
Well, I
So
would say go take a look at some of those old Jim Lee X-Men issues where you cannot convince me that there wasn't some beef going on between him and Claremont.
oh,
Because
there had to be.
like
Yeah.
there'd be like this much of a face left and everything else was text.
Yeah. Even between Claremont and Byrne, and I love Claremont and Byrne. Chris Claremont's one of my favorite writers, but it is one of those things where you can tell at some points in time if a strong editor isn't there to kind of wrangle both of them, and in this case, the editor is, for more intensive purposes, it's me. If I can't wrangle myself in or direct the art in an appropriate way, it's going to get real weird real fast. So it's important for me to be able to understand that sometimes, I maybe would have wanted to say this on the page, but I don't need to. The art's doing it for me. So maybe if I'm going to say anything, I'm going to say something else that juxtaposes what's occurring. You never want to have that situation in writing where like the thing that's occurring on the page is also then being described literally in the caption or by someone else. You want to have something that adds depth and insight into the scene, into the character. We've got thought bubbles, we've got narration, we've got different things, but they're used sparingly and they're used critically, so only when they're needed. But it's that kind of thing where you really need to know how to rein it in. And sometimes there's people that are just like, look, I'm the writer and my writing is king. You're just the artist. I tell you what to do. And that's such a wrong way to look at it. You need to have that mentality, especially in comics where the art is so important. It's so important. And as the writer, you got to learn when to take a back seat. And if the visuals aren't there, you then also have to learn how to communicate to the artist. Hey, maybe from this angle, maybe we punch up this scene a bit. Maybe, you could tell the story like this and the pacing will improve. And the artist has to also be willing to work with that as well. And vice versa. But it's really fun too, because doing it this way, when the artists get the book, like the actual finished book, because they never see the dialogue for the most part. They only see like 90% of the dialogue or the captions. So they're reading like a whole brand new book that they created with me, but they didn't know exactly what would be happening. And then there's sometimes things occurring that they draw that I'll add in deeper insight into it to really accent the things that have been drawn. So they don't even realize some of that I'm like, oh yeah, it's kind of like I'm manipulating them without them realizing it in a way. I'm like the little puppet master. But I get to go in there and have fun. So the whole process is so much fun across the board because it's always about being creative.
And so the link to King Cryptid on Indiegogo is in the chat. And I've got links, should be in the description for both Indiegogo and on the Alterna site. So you also have, is the campaign for the Alterna summer, or was it August, September campaign? Is that still open?
Yeah, we have the one that was taking place during winter in January. We have that fulfilling right now, and that's going to be fulfilled in about 2 weeks completely. Everything will be sent out, and we have the August one. That one's in demand. So both campaigns are technically in demand right now, but the winter one's going to close down definitely before that August one closes down.
Okay. And so, within the last year, Alterna has had a bit of a shakeup with its lineup, and you've added a bunch of new people. Is the lineup where you like it now? Are you like, yes, this is awesome? Or do you say, it's good, but, there's a couple other genres I really like to add in? Or what are your plans for Alterna's future?
I like the lineup that we have right now. I want the guys that we have right now to step up a little bit more. I want them to find their voice a little bit more, their inner Stan Lee or whatever it may be, because they have really great books. It's just they are not used to the aspect. Many of them, not all, but many. They're not used to the aspect of understanding that you have to go out there and really tell people and talk to people about your books. And you got to let them know what these characters are about, what these stories are about, the stories maybe that you plan on telling in the future, whatever it may be. Because as a creator-owned indie publisher, you don't have the legacy of 70 years of characters under your belt. You don't have a big corporation's marketing dollars under your belt. You basically just have your time and your passion. And if you're not going to put either of those towards telling people about your book, you might as well not get it through a publisher. You might as well just kind of publish it on your own. Maybe one story a year or whatever it may be. Work on it in your spare time and then get it out there. But I really like the books that we do have right now. I think that they're really, really great. And I love the fact that they're focusing on, it's kind of turned into like sci-fi horror fantasy in a way for Alterna. So we've got Wolf and Batsy that's kind of like a horror adventure drama story, a little bit of comedy in there, that dark humor. Unit 44, which has got a sci-fi humor spin to it. We got Blood Realm, which has got dark fantasy and a little bit of sci-fi even thrown in there too. Rob's kind of mutating that series a bit. Horace H. Hoover, which has like a pulpy detective kind of a weird sci-fi-ness to it. It's a very strange title, but it's a very interesting title and really well drawn, and the story is just interesting and the characters are great. And then there's Red Koi, which is kind of like a fantasy adventure. And then also, well, we still have It Came Out on a Wednesday, and that's an anthology that focuses mostly on horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. But that's where I find we're kind of all going. We're all gravitating towards this sci-fi horror fantasy thing. Would I like to have other genres in there? Sure, that would be great. But to me, it's more important about the creators. And like I was talking about before with the creators that we currently have, I think it's something that it takes a lot of time for certain people to get used to that aspect of really being the biggest and loudest voice of what you're creating. And people respond to that. If you're not passionate about what you're creating, if you're not getting out there and talking about it, if you're not utilizing as many different kinds of platforms as you can, first of all, no one's going to know what you're doing. And then second of all, if you are able to get that passion and get out there, it's infectious. People love seeing that. It makes people interested in what it is that you're doing. It brings up questions. And if they've got questions, it's because they're interested, which is great. The worst thing that can happen is complete and absolute silence when you're creating anything.
Yeah.
So, I really want to focus on the titles that we have, and the titles that left. I mean, I wish them the best, but at the same time, everything happens for a reason. So if they can find success on their own, great. That's wonderful. But at the same time, as when it comes to the search for new titles and things like that, I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on what we have, and I'm focused on King Cryptid. That's the thing. I see great books all the time out there, but then I look at it and go, no, they're doing good. I can't add anything to that. So if I can't really add anything to that for the most part, because that person's a very competent self-publisher, I feel no reason to approach that individual. And even if I did, there's a lot of times too where so many people nowadays are creating stories that I wouldn't want to publish. And it's not because they're not good, but it's because I want to really focus on ongoing stories. I want to focus on single issue, ongoing, episodic stories. I want to get away from the miniseries. I want to get away from the graphic novel. I want to focus more on comics being comics. And there's a lot of creators out there right now that are very focused on the graphic novel. They're very focused on that miniseries, that 80-page story or so, and that's that. And I think it's mostly because we don't have a lot of stories to really reference. You got to go back maybe 30 years even to reference proper episodic comic books. So a lot of creators are kind of like, well, I'll create sort of the stuff that I see, but I don't want to do 6 issues or whatever. I'm going to put out a graphic novel. I find that for me, it's super easy writing these episodic stories, but for a lot of people, it's a very difficult thing. They really need a lot more room to work with, or so they think. I don't think people really need anything close to the amount of room that they think they need to work with. There's even books at Alterna where creators will be like, I don't know how you fit like the complete story in like 22 to 24 pages. I need this and that and whatever. And there's times when I can show them an issue of theirs and be like, okay, well, if I was the editor on your book, because I'm not the editor of their work is creator owned. So I tried very minimally, unless it's a dire situation or there's really big red flags popping up, I try not to tell them how to create their stories. But there's situations where I'm like, if you want my opinion on it as an editor, I chop that page, that panel, this one, that one, this conversation. These things don't add anything to this issue. You're losing your focus of what this issue is about and what you should be communicating in that story, because you're wandering off into X, Y, and Z. And you think you need to tell that, but you really don't need to tell that. So you're actually doubling your work sometime and cutting your effort in half, and you're losing results on that. But again, over the course of a lot of years as a publisher, anytime I've had to have that conversation, they don't like having that conversation. They're like, who are you? You can't tell me. I'm like, all right, well, the book's probably going to get canceled because it's not selling. Now, if your book is like really selling, I have no room to talk. So if the book's really popular and people love the way it is, But if someone comes to me and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing here, I don't know how to get sales up, so we talk about strategy, we'll talk about other things. But if you've done everything, then it's the book. So if everything else isn't working and you still can't improve upon sales, then something has to be done about the book. And if you want to have that conversation, I'll have that conversation. But most creators don't want to have that conversation. Most creators get really weird about that conversation and it gets emotional fast. So it's
Um,
like, okay.
have you noticed a difference between younger creatives and older creatives, especially older who have worked in the industry previously? Have you noticed like a difference in how well they accept criticisms like that?
I would like to say yes. I mean, if I had to really broad brush it, yeah, definitely. But there's also, I found that there's exceptions. There's creators out there that have been in the industry for a while, and they'll send in a submission, and I'm just thinking like, what is this crap? This is horrible. Like, and you're this person who worked on this and this. I'm thinking like, what is this? You're sending me like your crap, and you're like, oh yeah, who cares? Alterna, they'll publish it, right? It'll be garbage. I won't say that to them, but man, when I'm reading it, I'm thinking like, I know what you're capable of. I've read some of it. And now you're sending this in, and I'm floored. It's so bad. And then there's instances where, so in certain instances like that, I'll see a standard of quality that's lessened. But there are cases where I've talked to someone, and then immediately they start pulling rank, and it won't even be like a harsh criticism. It'll more or less just be kind of like a question, like asking, why this kind of thing and not, this direction instead, or, why this kind of format for the book and not this one, if you were able to do that, you've got a real strong character here that I think could carry an ongoing series. Why are you just, wanting to do a graphic novel or a mini series? You could do these episodic stories and really build something. And I find that there's so many people that just, they're their goal is to come up with as many different characters and types of stories as possible, hoping that one of them will hit it. And what I mean by that is maybe one of them will get picked up for a film or whatever else that there
Yeah.
is. They're not going into it with like, no, I really want to tell a great comic series with a lot of great characters in this world, in this setting, and we kind of just follow along and see what they're up to. And that's kind of what comics were built on. They were built on this kind of serialized storytelling, and you really got attached to these characters because of it. It was like hanging out with some friends after a while, and that's why I think so many people nowadays are so hurt by a lot of the weird changes that occur to these characters too, because they're not just fictional people. You've seen their life. You know how they behave. You know what they've been through. So they are very real to you, and a lot of the things they've been through have possibly even helped the reader through difficult times in their life. So there's a lot of, like we were talking about before, with the different kind of morals and themes of stories, because that's all storytelling is communication of ideas and stories and concepts. It's honestly it's just as little and just as huge as that. So when you take it and you go, oh, it's just fiction. Why are you getting so worked up? It's the basis of humanity. Stories are what make us who we are. It's what unites. It's what divides. It's what carries us through time. We can point to it as an example, and we can go, yeah, that's something that gives me strength. So these are things that make us who we are. They're not just it's just make believe. Why are you getting so upset? It's to say that is to not even understand what it is to be human. But so anyway, I digress. So when it comes to these stories, I really want people to focus on that kind of a thing. And I'll see certain creators when they're younger take criticism really well, and then I'll see certain creators that are also around the same age and they lash out. It runs the gamut, but yeah, I have noticed that, and this is probably the expected answer, that the newer, younger creator is more likely going to lash out and get defensive, as opposed to the creator that's been around for a while. But the thing is, you will get the creator that's been around for a while that'll be like, "Hey, I'm above criticism at this point. Don't tell me anything," and that does happen every now and then.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious because if you were in the game in the old days, you most likely went to an art school where you had to go through crits, and if you were coming up through um, the major publishing system, you would have taken a lot of crap from editors over the years, like do this, do that. So in some ways, it hones your senses, but also potentially it makes you better with oh, okay, I'll redraw that arm or whatever. Whereas the younger generation, the bar to entry is so much lower than it ever was, just to get your stuff out there. And you can get a better education now taking some online courses than I've seen for actual in university
Oh, totally.
art
Yeah.
education for 10%, 5% of the cost. But the other problem is I've noticed that a lot of them get very sensitive. The first second, um, anybody just not even negative, just even like, oh, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Whereas opposed to, back in the day, you would get beaten up so badly after your first semester's crit, you need to go
Oh
drink
yeah,
yourself.
you put your stuff on the wall and everyone takes shots, and then after that first crit, you're like, "Oh crap, the stuff I'm saying about people's stuff is really gonna come back at me."
Exactly. So we have a question here from the Dungeon Delver. Will you have a Bible or encyclopedia for comic that you publish and sell? I mean, and then
Yeah, yeah.
Logan Effling, King Cryptid Handbook or Cryptopedia?
Yeah, yeah. So I want to do two different versions of that. One of them is a stretch goal, actually, on the King Cryptid campaigns, and we haven't hit it. We haven't even come close. It's kind of a stretch goal that's out there. I think it's like 75K or something to do what is known as the Necro Files, and Necro is a New England Cryptid Research Organization, and that's basically a government front for cryptid genetic research. It has nothing actually to do with researching into cryptids as much as it is utilizing human subjects and researching on them. So in this world of King Cryptid, cryptids fully do exist, but they're not quite as acknowledged as you'd think they would be. So Necro has a lot of different vials of DNA and whatnot on file. They've got a lot of different samples where they try to manipulate human genes and turn these genes into human hybrid cryptids. But they're also trying to create cryptids off of this DNA and clone and replicate. They haven't really been able to do so just yet. There's an overarching story within King Cryptid where Necro is they've been trying to get to King Cryptid for a while, but King Cryptid was kind of flying under the radar for about 30 or so years. The Necro thought that he was dead, or I guess maybe he never really did exist to begin with. But now he's back, and that's really piquing their interest. So he's shot right up to the top of their most wanted list. So they really want him for a lot of different reasons, and one of which and I won't reveal that. And we'll get there soon. But one of which I don't think readers are going to see coming. So there's a couple different things with King Cryptid that make him unique, and Necro is really interested in that. One of which I don't think the readers are really going to understand until that issue really plays out. But so in that Necro file, that would be a bonus on the campaign. It's basically how Necro has their case files and their profiles for these various cryptids. And certain things are redacted, certain things are crossed off, that kind of thing. But it's their detailed summary as to what these things are on their reports. And then the other thing that I want to do is more closer to like a King Cryptid handbook, but like it's a pocket guide, that kind of a thing,
Mm-hmm.
where it's kind of like a small 4x6, and it has it's like a little guide of like a field guide of where you would find these cryptids in these areas and that kind of a thing, keeping it fun. And the last and the third thing, and this won't be for years, we'll have enough characters to do it. Would be how they used to do those character guides like the Marvel Universe
Hey,
guidebook,
yeah.
and yeah, the
Oh,
Who's
great.
Who DC. Yeah, it'd be like that. But I'll do that when we've got like enough to fill a good sized issue like that.
So you mentioned before that you keep all the stuff in your head, but do you have some of this stuff written
Oh
down still?
yeah. I've got a bunch of it written down. It's more or less the exact details and how characters would interact and what they would say. That's
Okay.
largely in my head. So the secrets die with me if something happens to me. I mean, there's no anything to go in there and go, let's look at the notes. He must have had notes. No, it's all in here. Uh, so
So
for
when
better or
you're
worse.
when you're doing these conversations and dialogues between your characters for your books, do you do any voice? Like, do you speak these out loud, or
Oh yeah. Especially when it comes to dialogue, it's very important, I think, to speak out what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. The intonation pattern, the inflection of how they're saying certain things, and then that has to be communicated with the lettering. So certain things will be broken up in
Mhm.
speech depending on the pacing of how that character is talking. There's things that I find even in modern comics where I think they're going for some kind of dramatic whatever is occurring, but it'll all just be a big word balloon, word salad. And it's just, there's no emphasis, there's no bold italic, there's no pacing, there's no anything. It's just like the whole text, a clump of text. And I'm like, I read that and I just read it as monotone the whole way through. It doesn't speak to me. So I'm thinking like, am I supposed to act this out for you? Because that's the job of the lettering. And they did that in comics for so long where you would get the emphasis. You would get this when it's a certain speech that's heightened. But in modern comics, everything is like they're all on, 5 Prozacs a day. And it's just kind of like, yeah, so we're going to fight that guy right now. Okay, that's great. Like, it's just that kind of a
Yeah.
thing, you
Well, I
know?
mean, the hit in editing was the biggest blow to the comics
Oh,
industry.
totally. Totally.
Because there's absolutely no quality control in editing.
And you can see it too because there's writers where you'll that are still writing today and their stuff today is garbage compared to what it used to be. And then you look at who's editing and you compare it and go, "Oh, well, that's it right there."
Yeah, and I can see a lot of demoralization. I used to write copy for advertising for companies, and how much did I really care if we sold another computer software package or something? Not very much. I can see that with the art and the writing. Like, I'm only getting paid so much, and it's a
Yeah.
shame. But
Yeah, it is a shame, and it's one of those things that as soon as you start doing that, what I don't understand with creators nowadays when they start going down that road and they start losing the love and they're working for the corporate industry, as soon as you can get out of that contract and go indie. There's so many ways to do it now, especially if you're a really big name. Even if you don't want to fulfill your own crowdfunder or something, if you're a big name and you're going to
yeah,
succeed in getting that thing, go hire someone else to fulfill it. You'll make more than enough. So it's strange to me. There's all other aspects of it. If you don't know how to pre-press the book, if you don't know how to put the page layout together, you don't know how to do. You can hire someone. You can talk to people and get it done. You don't need to stick in the corporate system. If you're doing the thing where I don't want to give them my best stuff, and I see that a lot. I think it's like over the past 30 years, there's a lot of creators that are outright like, I don't want to give them my best stuff because that's
sure.
mine. I want to own it, and I get it. I get it. But at the same time, if you're not really giving your best, you're also not going to grow that fan base. That's going to help you springboard and do. Yeah, I mean, imagine if all the image guys were like, I ain't drawing my best stuff on these guys. I want to,
Yeah,
screw that. But they gave them some of their best stuff. Sure, they were resentful for some of it, a couple of them more than others. But the reason that they commanded the fan base that they did and grew to be legends was because they gave their best stuff. So it's strange. It's that kind of thing of like dress for the job you want, not the job you have. That sort of. But it's like
yeah.
work for create that kind of type of thing. Always do the best work you could possibly do. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, for about 30 years, I've been saying people took all the wrong lessons from the image guys
Totally.
in
Yeah.
every possible way.
Every way.
Marvel, indie, guys
Every
come.
facet of it, top to bottom. It's crazy. It's crazy. I think we're seeing something really great nowadays, where we're seeing more of that. The creators are able to maintain their own property and become more entrepreneurial, which they have to do. You have to. And some people are built for it, and some aren't. So I get that that's going to happen too. Some people are more cut out to be entrepreneurs than others. But if you do want to go that route, you have to be that way. I hate that conversation that comes up all the time where so and so had this amazing character, and if it was their character and they had owned it and were indie the entire time, they would have reaped all the benefits. So and so probably wouldn't have known what the hell to do with that character. Let's be honest. Even the closest thing that we've ever had to that, where someone was so indie and then it took off, was probably Ninja Turtles. But even then, they didn't. They needed a couple different people in there to elevate that to what it was. So they still didn't know exactly what to do. There was a little bit of luck involved, where they met the right people at the right time and then hit the right thing at the right time, and then it took off. Did they do the work? Did they create? Absolutely, 100%. But to actually have something be really successful, and to be even unbelievably iconically successful, you're talking about a whole skill set that most creative people do not have whatsoever. And they won't even want to learn how to have it, which we've seen time and time again, where you're like, the people will be so resentful and go, that person's so successful, and why do they have that? They don't deserve it, and I'm more talented, and XYZ, whatever excuse they come up with. And then it's like, well, that person did this and that and the other thing and the other thing, and then they do that and then they do that. Are you prepared to do that? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, then you're not going to have what they have.
Yeah, so 20 some years ago, I was teaching design classes in colleges, and I would ask design students that, like, well, why aren't you making mugs? Why aren't you printing T-shirts? Why don't you make limited edition prints? All this stuff, like, you could sell at various art
Yeah,
shows.
relatively basic sort of stuff. Yeah.
And like, your students, you have no money, you'll make some money. And a lot of the other professors were pissed. Like, oh, why would you cheapen yourself this way? Well, you're going to be designers. You're selling crap for other people. Why not sell your own stuff?
Yeah.
But
It's
do you think these characters are going to have, like, a long-term utility? Well, in talking with some other creators, more behind the scenes, I've always said, yeah, go put out the books, because once you've already paid for that book, you've got all the art and all the lettering and stuff. You can always give that away for free or for very cheap to sweeten the pot on a future campaign. So for me, like, whatever you're building now, you can still monetize it. You can use that to add more value to future products.
Oh, totally. I mean, just the fact that the only way that you really can even sell merchandise of anything is because people care about that character. They care
Mhm.
about that thing. Same thing goes for, sports jerseys even. Why do you buy the jersey of that team, let alone the jersey of that player? They mean something to you.
Yeah.
It's very few people that are just like, no, I don't follow the sport. I don't like the player or whatever. I just like the way it looks or the way it sounds. Very few sales are going to come from that. Most of it's going to be from people that have an emotional connection. So in that same respect, if you've got these characters that you're creating in these stories, and they're utilized over and over again, so you're building upon them, you're making them real. You're going to have people that fall in love with these characters, in some way, shape, or form, and they're going to go, yeah, that King Cryptid shirt means something to me. This Victor Lugo sticker, yeah, I think that's awesome. This Behemoth jersey or whatever, I'm just saying, they think that's great. This hat of so and so on and so forth. It means something to them at that point. But if you just kind of go out there and you don't really understand the connection that people have to these characters, that they want to take them from the book and make them a part of their life. I don't really get that. I don't understand that, because it's very apparent at this point in time, and it doesn't cheapen your character. It doesn't do anything like that. As long as you're understanding that the character comes first, the story comes first. So it's the same thing. People go, they tear apart He-Man all the time for that, Masters of the Universe, and they're like, oh, it's just sell toys. It's first of all, what's so wrong with that? And then second of all, but did you see the show? Did you see the characters? Did you see the designs? Like what they were doing obviously resonated. Because if it didn't resonate, they wouldn't have sold crap. And there's so many different things that happen like that where, yeah, they made that cartoon or they made that movie or they made whatever. And then they made merchandise and no one wanted it. Why? Because it didn't resonate.
Do you think that I think I'm a few years older than you, but do you think sort of our generation or our era grew up sort of in a sweet spot where we had all these toy products where somebody, for some reason, actually sort of took it seriously and said, I want to make real stories and uh, things that would impact kids and, something that just isn't like the garbage that Hanna-Barbera was putting out previously. Do you
Well,
think
I
that
mean,
in the
yeah,
years
it's
now it's a little different for us?
well. First, I want to state that there are definitely some Hanna Barbera things I love,
Okay, some are good, but
but
Jabber, I don't know that you can really compare that to like.
yeah, I get what you're saying. So, I think yeah, and it's interesting because of the fact that when they first tried to basically create toys that were made after a show, it was Hot Wheels, believe it or not, and there were laws made to shut
Mhm.
that down. So it got opened up again during the Reagan administration that it was declared that, yeah, you could make a show or this and that or whatever and have merchandise for it. It was probably something most likely used to stimulate the economy too. So the thing is that a lot of the toy makers and a lot of these storytellers that went in there, it was about the characters, it was about the story, it was about making something that the kids could use their imagination and they could bring home, and now they can act out and make stories of their own. Sure, you could look at it really cynically and really cold and be like, it's just about making money. Well, to that respect, everything for the most part is about making money. So if you want to go down that road, it really turns quickly into, well, how cynical and black pilled do you want to get? So the side of making a product of quality is, yeah, you're probably going to make money if you're selling that thing, sure, and why not? But there's people all the time that they'll look at it so strangely and just to reduce it to meaninglessness and to something so cold, and that's far from really what it is. So you get a lot of these properties that we were really fortunate, I think, to grow up with in a certain time period where it was the perfect marriage of creating stories and characters of quality while also making sure you had the merchandise that you could create your own stories and characters of quality at home. And I think that probably spurned a lot of storytellers to creating certain things. And I think we're probably seeing a decline in storytelling because we haven't really had that for at least 20 some odd years.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I was at Target the other day, and I was just looking through the toys, and it's like, okay, remake of Transformers, remake of GI Joe, and it's just nothing sort of hits like Children's Palace back in the '80s.
Yeah,
Stuff
yeah. And
or GI Joe toys.
and it's constant reinvention for the modern audience, whatever that garbage means. The ever elusive modern audience, because people have changed so much, right? Yeah, okay. Um,
Well,
so
yeah,
it's crazy that they feel the need to constantly reinvent whatever and reboot this and reboot that instead of actually looking for the newest, latest, greatest thing, which was what made the creative explosion of the 80s what it was because it was constantly this search for something new, you know? And even if it was similar, it was still new. It wasn't just constantly, let's reboot this, let's remake that, let's do this over and over and over again till the point that now that's cheapening it. That's creating something that's without heart and without merit.
yeah, you kind of reminded me again. Every time I hear modern audiences, I wonder who are the modern audiences? Like, did anybody actually do any research into this? Because,
Yeah.
when Marvel said they wanted to attract more women and minorities, that actually is a smart play. Um, the problem is you do that by creating new stories in new genres. You want to get more women? Okay, bring back romance
Yeah,
comics.
you don't do
Uh,
addition through
yeah,
subtraction, which is what they
true
always do.
true crime. You don't jettison the money you're making, the people you already have. Like, little girls do not want to see Thor as a girl. That's not what they're into. Now, maybe some, okay, but for the
Give
most part, they're not into that. The women who
there's
like
Sif,
comics
there's
like it the way that
Valkyrie,
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But they probably would like more romance-oriented stories, even if it were set in a superhero universe. What about two teenagers who are discovering their powers and they're kind of secret enemies, but they're kind of in love? That could be a good story. Or what
Yeah.
about going for more adult women,
Which is a
but
timeless
within
tale. You're
true
talking
crime?
about
Yeah,
Romeo and Juliet, Tristan and
exactly.
Isolde. You're talking about all these different things. People haven't changed all too much in terms of the stories that they enjoy. There's just a reason we could read something that's like 1,000 years old and know where those characters were coming from. Because people haven't changed all too much in terms of what makes us kind of feel something for an individual.
Yeah,
Because the human experience is relatively the same across the board. But when they do that, when they kind of vilify the audience that they have or whatever it is, and they sacrifice them up to the modern audience gods, and they're like, all right, now will we have the modern audience? What the hell are you doing? That's
all
some of
five
the
of them.
stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. And if anything, what you're actually talking about is everything they used to do. They used to have a plethora of genres and storytelling and utilization of these characters in that component, and all kinds of people read them. The biggest thing that they need to work on is getting their stories back in front of people again. That's what's killed their sales is because the problem used to not be distribution and they would blame distribution, but now the problem is distribution and they don't blame distribution. So now they blame the audience they have, and they've been kind of blaming the audience they have ever since that dreaded collector bubble burst.
Yeah.
It's not the publisher gimmick bubble burst. It's the collector bubble burst. Oh, those dreaded collectors! They just stopped buying the crap we were publishing that was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Damn them!
Well,
It's not
it's
the
not very
gimmicks.
nice. Yeah. Do you ever see things like sort of circling back, like to an extent, the creator to consumer pipeline? Uh, you know, you people like Alterna, they say, I want to give you money. You are shipping them books directly. I used to get GI Joe and Transformer in the mail as a kid,
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
this isn't exactly a new thing. Um, do you ever think that we will find a physical space where younger people would go and maybe buy books again?
Oh, I absolutely think so. It's about utilizing that space effectively and about getting those retailers to understand that they need to utilize that space effectively. There's all kinds of ways you could do it. It's just us being on newsstand. It taught me a lot of different lessons. We were there for 2 years, and I saw that there's no accountability when there's full returnability. So when the retailer is not taking a risk whatsoever, they don't have any skin in the game. The only skin in the game they have is the shelf space. They sort of don't care about what happens to your product, how it's treated, where it's placed, anything like that. Even when it comes to scanning back what they have left, I'll notice that, like, okay, we've got negative returns on certain titles. How's that possible? We send you 1,200, we get back negative 1,220. And it's because they're scanning that one. Well, what
Yeah.
happens when that title is 399 and that one's 199, and you just scanned 399 ones when it was the 199 one that you should have really? So now we lose money for stuff that didn't even happen, and that happened 3 times with the newsstand distributor. And I was like, look, if there's no way to prevent this, we can't do this. This is ridiculous. You know, we're essentially just making books for advertising at that point, to just get them out there. Maybe some people see it, maybe if it's put in the right place. But usually they weren't. And we would be getting pictures even from readers that were kind enough to be like, your books are being placed over here where it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, that's great. You know, they'll be at Books A Million or Barnes and Noble, and it'll be, you know, next to like Popular Mechanics instead of with the DC and the Archie and the whatever was on newsstand. Madness. So there's a lot of different things that would need to occur at the retail level for them to really kind of shape up and become a spot that these things could thrive again. But the way that would happen is if the power players came in and actually were like, we're giving you a spinner rack, we're setting it up, we got sales reps, and they're coming out. The same way that, you know, the Frito-Lay and Coke and Pepsi and yada yada, all these different, the candy manufacturers, they have sales reps that come out. And they make sure that the display is good, everything's taken care of, they're well stocked, yada yada. You know, and it would start as a top-bottom kind of thing. So it would start at the top with those companies understanding that that's how you're going to sell more books again.
Yeah.
But it's going to come at a cost initially of doing this kind of business, and it has to be seen as an investment that's going to matter in the long run. And that's what's going to get them the sales that they're looking for. Not changing up their characters, not destroying their IP, not reinventing things, not adding the 50th version of a character, you know, not rebooting the universe. Actually getting the books in front of more people again and making sure that they're books of quality. Their merchandising teams understand it. You know, if you go to the bigger stores, you see what's on the merchandise. If it's Marvel, generally it's still John Romita art. You know, and God bless Romita, man. He passed away recently, one of the greatest. But it's Romita's art. If it's DC, usually Jose Luis Garcia Lopez's art. You know, they're still in that sweet spot of these classic, iconic representations. Every now and then it's somebody else, but it's still that version of that character that's iconic and classic. So merchandising wise, they know what they're doing. They know what sells. But the books, they're just like, oh, whatever. I don't know. This, that, the other thing, you know, it's modern audiences. Like they're just a robot on the fritz. They're not actually trying to create these things that are appealing to a mass audience. And that's what they should be more concerned with, is the mass audience, not the modern audience.
Yeah. Well, it is Saturday night, and I'm sure you would love to get back to your wife. So just for everyone, King Cryptid, issues 5 through 9 for Alterna. And there is also the option to get all 9 issues on there if you missed 1 through 4 somehow. Go back it. You could do it on Indiegogo or directly on the Alterna site. You can still back. Can you back the spring?
You can back anything and everything right now on Indiegogo, and you can get it on the Alterna site. So
Nice.
I always recommend the Alterna site, but you guys go wherever you want to go. It's fine by me. I mean, that's why we offer the option. But if you do go to the Alterna site, you'll notice you can get a whole hell of a lot in one stop, as opposed to hitting up several different Indiegogo campaigns. So you'll make it a little bit easier on yourself to do this one-stop shopping.
And Pete doesn't have to pay the Indiegogo tax, which means more pizza for him.
That's true. That's very true.
All right. So for anyone who's interested, I will be back soon with more guests. Hopefully becoming at least a weekly thing, hopefully in about a month or so. Until then, Friday nights, I'm on the Dungeon Delvers channel playing classic Gamma World, where I play Rex Dashington, mech suit pilot. And there will also be more videos coming up for my campaign guide to Empire of the Undying Sun, hopefully to be released early next year. So thank you, everyone, for coming by. Thanks for coming, Pete. It was great seeing you again.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for watching, too. Appreciate it, guys.
And good night.